So as you jump in tonight, we just want to thank you. As part of this project that we've had the opportunity to do for a number of years and well before that, Ci3T was actually introduced in 1996. So we've been doing this a very long time. And as part of this integrated three-tiered models of prevention, we are focusing on academics, positive behavior interventions and supports, and social and emotional well-being. And the idea is to support one integrated systems in a school that is indeed integrated. And it all relies on data-informed instruction for students and data-informed professional learning for adults. And you yourself might have an integrated tiered system in your buildings. And if not, that is okay too. And as you're reflecting on our conversations tonight, just know that this can apply to your integrated tiered system of support as well. If you go onto that page, ci3t.org/enhance, you will, after you've registered as a first-time user, see a whole array of resources to help you work across the tiers. You'll see a bank of resources for leaders. You'll see information on screening. You'll see resources at tier 1. You'll see low intensity strategies, as well as resources specific to tier 2 supports and tier 3 and foundational information like things on how consequences work and how reinforcement works. But tonight we're honing in on tier 2. And specifically, we're going to spend a little time setting the stage on how tier 2 works within an integrated tiered system of support. And we'll focus the second half on all direct behavior ratings. And so you're going to get to hear from Kate, who's going to give you the 30,000 views and tell you a little bit about DBRs. And then you're going to hear from Mark, who's going to walk you through a step-by-step process that you can actually go and do that. So as we get started tonight, we are going to be working predominantly, as I mentioned, in this one resource, which is direct behavior ratings. And if you're brand new to these modules, we do have an infographic that will help you to navigate how to click through those, download little videos, infographics, and give you the resources that you need to get started. Now, for those of you who are here as part of a Ci3T system, this would be the time to go to your manual if it's on your school's website, if you happen to have a hard copy of it, because we'd love for you to have your own implementation manual here with you as you get started. If this graphic that you're looking at right now is like a one-pager that explains all the structures that are a part of Ci3T. So in addition to having planned time together for meeting with people like Ci3T leadership teams in a building and time with your faculty and staff and coaches, it's also a firm commitment for year-long professional learning. And tonight is an Empower session, as you know, and the whole focus is on people that are putting these supports in place in school. So you might be here as somebody that's actually going to go do this with a kid in your classroom. That is awesome. You might also be here as somebody who's going to go teach others how to do it, and then that is equally awesome. So for tonight's Empower session, we have just one more left after this, and it will all be at tier 3, looking at functional assessment-based intervention. But our 3 big goals for tonight are the following. We want to situate tier 2 because we want to clear up misunderstandings as to what it is and what it is not. And we're going to introduce you to this idea of tiered intervention grids to help you organize all the wonderful things that you do extra for kids in your building. Then we are going to get that introduction I mentioned from Kate and the step-by-step process from Mark. And along the way, I especially want you to pay attention to 3 things. Anytime we're doing something extra for kids, we want to make sure we're first assessing social validity before we get started to see, are people on board with the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes? And then when you put this intervention in place, we need to collect information, treatment integrity, to make sure it is happening as planned, because we really can't draw accurate conclusions about how well any extra intervention is working if we don't have that information. And then third, you got to collect the information on student performance data. And Kate and Mark will tell you much more about that, but please keep that in mind. So here is our overview of getting started. And so we're going to go ahead and jump in. If you are feeling like you want to look at this material yourself on your device, you are welcome to. Everything that we're sharing with you in this presentation, you can find on the page that says professional learning. Scroll down, and it's that Project Empower link you signed up on. And by the way, very shortly, it'll be next week, you'll actually have all the listings of the offerings for next year. And we've changed the registration system so you can click in one time and check the ones that you want to attend to. So now also, is anybody here from Kansas tonight? And if you are, will you please pop that in the chat right now? And if not, you might wish you were in Kansas right after you hear this. So in Kansas, they have an additional way of navigating professional learning. So by being here tonight, your districts in Kansas will, of course, award you up to 2 professional learning points. However, if you can show that you have applied this, like gone and taken this intervention and done it with a student, they will double the professional learning points. And if you can show impact on students, like what happened when you put it in place, and if you can show the impact of it being in place, like a graph like I'm showing you now, they can award you up to triple the points. So tonight's 2-hour session could be worth 6 points to you. So stay tuned if you're in Kansas, and all the paperwork that you would need to do that is going to be featured here tonight. So let's jump in. When we are talking about tier 2 within a Ci3T model of prevention, but when we're thinking about tier 2 within a Ci3T model of prevention, we want to emphasize that it is additive in nature. It's building on the base about what's happening at tier 1. And in Ci3T model, as we mentioned at the very beginning, rather than having separate teams to focus on academics and behavior and students' social and emotional well-being, in a Ci3T model of prevention, it's all integrated into one system. And that becomes the base. Behavioral expectations are taught, they're practiced, they're acknowledged, they're reinforced. There's a validated resource that's brought in to level the playing field for all kids. So it might be something like Second Step, or it might be something like Character Strong that is taught school-wide to give kids the skill sets that they need to be positive, productive, lifelong learners with good self-determined behaviors. And of course, awesome academics. And those are all integrated together. So some of those resources that you find on the website can help you achieve those goals. And the first 5 sessions that we've had this year as part of Project Empower has all focused on building the base. So Nicki Minaj was completely right. Tonight, we are dipping a foot forward into tier 2. So we're thinking about what happens for students when tier 1 is not enough. So when students need more than tier 1 has to offer, even with all that other stuff in place, it is not a tragedy. It is an expectation that some kids are going to need more. And it's our job to make sure that every single teacher is empowered with all the tools in their toolkit to know how to detect students that might need more, put these interventions in place, do so with fidelity as planned, and make sure that people are comfortable with the goals, procedures, and the outcomes. And there's entire modules now available to you about that tier 2 process. And tier 2 does not always mean like small group. Back in the day, for those of us who have been around the block more than a couple times, it used to be tier 2 was like small groups, and then tier 3 was individual. And that is not the deal now. We're going to think about it more in terms of intensity. But we want to have a plan that increases in intensity according to students' need. And it can be different. Like I might have tier 1 needs for reading. I might have tier 2 needs for math. I might have tier 3 needs for my social skills. And so we want to make sure that there is a fluid, data-informed approach for making sure that people have what they need. And when we think about tier 2, I'd like to tell you just a little story to situate this scene. So I'm going to invite you just to sit back for just a second. So keeping in mind, it is not always a small group situation. I think of it like this. So many years ago, I am 58 years old now. When I was 48 years old, I decided I really wanted to spend a lot of time with my son because he was getting ready to go to college. So I literally cleared my calendar, decided not to do a lot of public speaking, not do a lot of travel. And I went to him and I'm like, good news, bud. I know it's your senior year. I have cleared my calendar so that I can come and spend time with you. And shockingly, he was not super excited about that possibility. And instead, I focused on my daughter, who's almost 4 years younger. So I went to her and I'm like, hey, Katie Bug, I know this next couple years is going to go by very fast. And I should mention, he is now 29 and she is now 25. And so I go to her and I'm like, I want to spend time with you. And I said, how about we go to yoga? And she's like, no offense, mom, but yoga is kind of for old ladies. And I'm like, awesome, shots fired, but that's fine. So I said, how about instead we go to Zumba together? And she's like, okay, let's do that. And she's very athletic, I should say. So we go to Zumba and I'm in this class, I'm breaking it down and I'm feeling like I'm fairly stunning. And we walk out of this and she's like, that can never, ever, ever happen again. She's like, if you want to spend time with me, this is where I'll be. And what you're looking at is a CrossFit gym. And how many of you have done CrossFit? Please raise your hand if you have. Oh, thank you. Way to go. All right. So CrossFit is constantly varied functional fitness at high intensity. And I'm like, I can do this. I'm in. I don't know much, right? But I go in here and I do what every good mom does. I'm 48 at the time, as I mentioned. I've got 2 kids. I put on a big pair of sweats. I go in there. And the very first activity is jump rope. So let's just pause for a second. I'm 48. I've had 2 kids. So at the end of that horrific experience, the coach then says, if anybody needs to use the bathroom before the next activity, let's do that now. And I remember thinking at that moment, if only he had known about pre-correction as an intervention. So handle things as best I can. Then I come back out, and the next activity is chest to bars. And this is Katie doing chest to bars, where you're pulling yourself up. Now, at this point, the coach recognizes the fact that I have limited athletic skills. I definitely cannot do a pull-up. So he's like, come over here. And he puts this rubber band up there. And then, so like, I put my foot into that and I go to pull and still nothing happened. So he's like, you need 2 rubber bands. So now I step into 2 rubber bands and it is like a miracle. My chin is over the bar and things are happening. All of a sudden, I feel like I'm an athlete. Then the next thing that's supposed to happen is this. These are deficit handstand push-ups. And so instead, he's like, hey, Kathleen, come over here. And he sets up a box. So he's like, I want you to lay on the box and go like this. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, what's that mat for? And he's like, well, normally people use an abdominal mat for sit-ups, but in your case, in case your arms give out and you lose control, I don't want you to hit your head on the floor. I'm like, okay. So I'm successful. At no point in that gym did he ever say to me, you've got to leave. And he could have, right? He could have said, lady, you peed on yourself in the warm up. We can't have you here. You've got to go. I thought it was some of the very best tier 2 supports. He gave me every single thing I needed to stay in that room. So in a Ci3T model, what we think about here are what are the research-based and evidence-based things that we can give to every coach, every teacher, so that they know what to do with the kids that's struggling with social skills or struggling with reading or struggling with both, or so racked by anxiety that they can't be fully present in that moment. So when we are talking tonight about tier 2, what you're going to learn tonight about DBR is one of hopefully several really good, well-researched interventions that you've got in place. They don't necessarily have to be one-to-one instruction. They don't necessarily have to be small groups. So I'd like you to think about it as additive. It's not replacing what's happening at tier 1. It's building on it. And so as you're thinking about your manual, if you are here tonight in a Ci3T school, if you can open up your manual and scroll to the bottom, you're going to see this whole bank of resources. And we've got wonderful coaches who can help you find it if you need any assistance with that. But the idea behind the tiered intervention libraries that are available in your school and your district's implementation manual is it's creating a sense of transparency of what is available for kids that indeed need more than tier 1 has to offer. And a support is not a person. It is what the person does. So like it might be self-monitoring, and that's named there. That is the name of the intervention. Very effective. Then you'll see a description of exactly what that means, because even though we've got people that have done this for a long time and they know what those supports are, there might be people brand new to teaching that are learning those things. This is the game changer though. Now, and this is really important, we do not want to run the risk of overlooking a student in need. We want to make sure that we're actually using that school-wide screening data and other data that are collected as part of regular school practices that we've talked about in many sessions before to see like who in my school, in my grade level, in my classroom might benefit from this extra support. And just like we talked about a few minutes ago, we also want to make sure that once I've seen, like, do I have kids that might benefit from this? I still need to do those 3 things. I need to check with them to make sure we're on board together. I need to have a plan to make sure that it's being put in place as possible, as designed, and I need to know how it's working for kids. And lastly, I do need to have a plan for determining when I can either fade the intervention or move on to something more intensive if need be. But we don't want to leave kids for the rest of their life in tier 2s if they don't need that extra support. This is another example of a more intensive intervention, still at tier 2. This was designed by Wendy Oakes, who's here with us tonight. And it's called Set, Select, and Record. And it's all a process about layering on self-monitoring into a tier 2 reading intervention. Great illustration of how those can be integrated. You might also think about behavior contracts. So the things that that can be also a thing that's really grounded in applied behavior analysis. But whatever the extra things are, they shouldn't be a guess. They should be completely transparent. So tonight, when you hear them going through this, you're going to want to pay attention to those intervention grids. And if it's not something you currently have in your school system, either in your school building or your district, it would be a really good thing to think about doing, because we can make it much more transparent as to how you are supporting kids that need more than tier 1 has to offer. And it's a very great gift for families because it's basically this menu of extra support. And I want to just briefly mention before we move forward, and you can even intensify those low intensity strategies that we talked about in previous standalone sessions. So things as simple as behavior specific praise, when done in a more targeted way, can become a tier 2 intervention when done with intensity. So if you would, let's play the school game, please. Open up your chat and pop in there. What currently are you using for tier 2 interventions? And I'll give you just a few seconds to do that. Wonderful. That's great. And then when you're thinking about small groups, tell us a little bit about what you're doing in those small groups. Are they reading interventions? Are they writing interventions? What's going on in those? That's a little bit more detail. Is it social skills? Or is it anger management? Is it math instruction? Yeah, social skills. Great. Wonderful. So you guys have a lot of experience with tier 2s. As we are thinking about what you're doing right now, I'm going to invite you to think about, how do you find the kids that you think might benefit from those? And in the perfect world, like in a Ci3T model, you would want it to be a data-informed decision as who's going to get what. 3 times a year, we encourage people to look at multiple sources of data. These are fictitious data. These are not real kids, but these are illustrations of the types of data that you would likely have available on every single kid in your building from preschool to high school. Attendance, like how many days have they missed? How many times have they been tardy? How much are they present? What's it looking in terms of the number of office discipline referrals they've earned? What's their internalizing or externalizing scores? What are they doing in terms of math performance? Like, are they meeting expectations, exceeding it? Are they below benchmark? And the same for reading. So when we talk about using, and this is important, when we say use multiple sources of data, we're not saying you need multiple reading screenings. We're saying look at all the available sources together. So look at attendance, look at office discipline referrals, look at behavioral screenings, look at academic performance, so that you get a picture of that kid's complete areas of success and areas for refinement. So ideally, if you're in a Ci3T system, you would be able to open up your implementation manual. You would be able to log into your school's data management system and pull up your classroom. So like if I was still a 5th grade teacher or still a 7th grade teacher or still an 8th grade teacher, I would be able to go pull up the data for the kids in my class because I'd be permission for that. And then I could look to see what are their multiple needs at the same time. And if that happens to be like a lot of kids are showing up in the yellow or in the red, then that means I might need to make an adjustment at tier 1. So this is going to be very powerful for teachers to be able to use data to make determinations about who in my class might benefit from this. And tier 2 is not necessarily like a referral to the pre-referral intervention team. These are quick connections that teachers can make to help their kids gain access to the support. But we want to use the data so we don't accidentally overlook a student that could benefit from. And there are 2 types of errors that you're going to make somewhere in your lifetime. One is over including. So it's like a positive error in the sense that I say a kid that needs extra support when in fact they did not. I can live with that because the consequence of an error in screening is a false positive is that they step into an extra support. I really, really worry about false negatives. Like I want to not overlook a kid that has that need. So the screening becomes really important. Here's another look, and this was made by Mark Buckman on our team. So take that same entry criteria we just looked at. And then let's say I was looking for kids that had acting out issues and reading problems, and I wanted to find those kids together. So theoretically, it could be like I log into that system and I could sort, if you would, to be able to find kids that have both scoring in the yellow for moderate risk for both reading and behavior. And then that would tell me who in my class might need that extra layer of support. So this group might be a great group of kids for that set, select, and record intervention that you could put with your validated district reading program. And again, going to want to look at things like absences, because if the kid who is struggling, who is never there, needs a totally different support than the kid who is struggling and is always there. So in one situation, part of my intervention has to be motivating the kid to get to school, whereas the other one, it's clear that they're present, they're having a challenge, either accessing the instruction that's being provided, or there could be an additional need. And you might find, if you are in a Ci3T school and looking at your intervention grids right now, you might find that you have those exact same entry criteria for more than one intervention. And that's great, because you might find, like, some students might say, I would die of embarrassment if I had to have a self-monitoring form on my desk. So if that's the case, then we're not going to do that intervention for that kid. You might do something that's more private, like behavior contract. So we want to make sure that we have choice of research-based and evidence-based practices as we inform instruction. So right now, we are going to play the school game. I'd like you to answer these questions. How have you figured out who needs what? Like, have you used data before to make decisions about how to connect kids to some of those supports that you were just mentioning? How are you determining who needs more? And then what is currently offered at your school? Do you have a menu of supports? What's that looking like for you? All right, let's go do it.
So now tonight's main event, direct behavior rating. Now, I know we all have our favorite acronyms, right? It's a world of acronyms that we live in, but I think by the time we're done here tonight, DBR is going to be at least in your top 20, if not your top 10 favorite acronyms, okay, as you put this tool in your toolbox. So first, I'm going to provide an overview of direct behavior rating, DBR, and then in a little bit, I'll turn it over to Mark, and he'll go more in depth with a step-by-step process for how to implement DBR. So let's jump in. So here is this Tier 2 intervention grid. So Kathleen just reviewed for us what our Tier 2 intervention grids look like and how those fit within a Ci3T model of prevention. So just to carry that on through, you can see here on the screen that the support we're talking about is direct behavior rating, DBR. And in your intervention grid, you have a description of what DBR is and how you provide that support. And then you see in the middle your school-wide data and entry criteria, right? So we know what data we're looking at when we're going to consider implementing a DBR intervention for a student. We have our data to progress monitor, right? And we have our exit criteria. It's always good to call attention to the entry criteria, right? So that when we're talking about connecting students to Tier 2 supports, you're going to use multiple sources of data, as Kathleen just reminded us, which might include systematic screening data, academic performance data, and attendance data, all of which can be impacted by challenging behaviors. And then on the flip side, those exit criteria, right? So we never want to have a student who's in that kind of Tier 2 purgatory, right? We always want to have a plan for fading those supports. So this is what a DBR intervention might look like in your Tier 2 intervention grid. So we're going to open up that chat again. No rest for the weary. And I want to hear from some of you. What are your school's entry criteria for DBR if you are implementing a Ci3T intervention model? And if you're not, what do you think might be some of the data sources that you would look at to consider whether or not DBR is a good fit for a student? Removals, referrals, absolutely, right? Those are good indicators of what's happening with some challenging behavior maybe, or some behavior needs to support. Of course, screening, absolutely. Our academic and our social emotional behavioral. What else? How about any of our students here who I know are in academic behavior intervention classes right now? Removals, lots of removals. Ooh, threat assessments. That's an interesting one. Nurse visits when we're thinking about some of those psychosomatic symptoms, right? Or support-seeking behaviors. Fantastic. All right. Lots of use of referrals. Very reliable source. Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of those ideas. Okay, so what is direct behavior rating? So direct behavior rating is a tool that involves three key pieces here. You can see them in bold. We've got a brief rating of a target behavior immediately following a specified observation period, right? Brief rating. We truly mean brief, right? How many seconds does it take you to make a check mark? That's pretty much what we're talking about for the duration of a DBR, right? Think about all your other tier two interventions. That's pretty good, right? It's absolutely brief. When we're talking about the target behavior, so these are the behavior or behaviors that we are interested in supporting for a student. And we want these to be, important behaviors for that student, relevant to what we're working on, and behaviors that are expected that we would want to see during the observation period. And what's that observation period? The observation period is that specific part of the day when you're going to observe the student and complete the DBR. So we want this to be a part of the day where the student struggles with the selected target behavior. So I know that might seem a little obvious, but always want to say that, right? If we're having difficulty with our academic engagement after recess, then we don't want to have our observation period before recess, right? If we're having difficulties in social studies or science, then we're not doing a DBR in English or math, right? So thinking about that, picking that observation period. So now here's a snapshot you can see on the screen of what a typical DBR form looks like. There's many different kinds out there. You're going to see all sorts of flavors and varieties, but here's a typical one. And you can see exactly where those three components are that I just described. So up at the top, you're going to have the details about the observation period. So all your usual background information, right? So the student, the teacher, the date, start and end time, and then the total minutes. Then you have your target behavior or behaviors. So here you see two common ones, academically engaged and respectful. And then you see the scale where you're going to complete your brief rating. So when you're doing a DBR, you're asking yourself what percentage of the time was the student exhibiting that target behavior? And that's right where you make your brief rating, right there with a check mark or an X or a star or a circle on the right number, wherever you'd like. Now, what is interesting here is when you're completing your DBR and making that brief rating, the rater can think of it as whatever scale is helpful for them. So if they are thinking in kind of categorical, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, if they're thinking more in percents of time, or if they're thinking that kind of not at all, sometimes all the time. So whatever scale helps you make that one rating about the student's behavior during that observation period. So what does it look like to implement DBR? We have really simple daily implementation steps. Like I said, that's why this is going to become one of your favorite acronyms. So we're going to let the student know that the DBR period is starting, right? Our observation period. During the observation period, you're observing the student, right? Right as the observation period ends, you're going to complete that rating, right? Circle the number, put your check mark, put your star. Then you're going to do a very quick check-in with the student, provide some behavior-specific praise and feedback. And then hopefully we always want to close out with the communication. You're going to share that DBR with their parent caregiver and making sure you know something to praise and something to practice, right? So really simple implementation steps. So when we think about defining what a direct behavior rating is, it's actually a pretty impressive tool because it's a combo tool. So Dr. Sandra Trifoulias, a professor at the University of Connecticut, is one of the original creators of the DBR, and she likes to describe it as a 2-for-1 special. And I don't know about you, but the grocery store lately, but I could use a 2-for-1 special, right? So it's a 2-for-1. You've got a combined intervention and built-in progress monitoring tool in one, right? As you're recording information about the student behavior, you're providing feedback, and you're facilitating homeschool communication. DBR is also easily individualized to meet specific needs, right? So it's absolutely flexible, and you can target one or more behaviors that you want to change and improve for a student during a specific time period. And there's that scale again that I just mentioned. So the DBR uses this easy to decipher scale. You have a range from 0 to 10. Right now you can see a typical one there has the numbers on it, and not at all sometimes all the time. But if you're working with a younger kiddo, you can absolutely put those smiley faces on there to help them understand their ratings, right? So you could have a sad face, a neutral face, and a smiling face, right? So it's a flexible rating system. Now, why is DBR effective? So DBR can be effective because it's really an efficient way to monitor changes in behavior over time. DBR is also providing a brief rating during a very specific period, right, with check ins with a teacher or another adult. And after the rating, they're being provided with behavior specific praise and instructional feedback. Those are all important strategies that we know to use with our students, right? And in a Ci3T model, DBR is effective because it's tied to a tier one reinforcement system, right? And we can include a self-monitoring component, which is another key component of effective intervention. And finally, DBR can serve as an efficient way to communicate a student's strengths, challenges, and growth with other educators in the building, as well as families. Now, with every intervention, right, we're going to have some benefits and some challenges. I've already touched on some of the key benefits, but just to highlight that DBR really is highly flexible and customizable, right? You can design it to meet the specific needs of your students. With that, you can utilize any target behavior that's operationally defined that can be used with DBR. For some students, that might mean picking a behavior that's tied to school-wide expectations. For other students, that might mean picking a behavior that has a more targeted focus, like active academic engagement or out-of-seat time. So really, the flexibility here allows you to meet a range of student needs and contexts. DBR is also freely accessible. I know, right? It's going to be one of your favorite acronyms. So there's plenty of free online resources to get you started in setting up DBR to meet your students' needs. You're at one of those kind of free online resources right now, an Empower session, right? And of course, there's the Ci3T module, but there's also others online that you can find. A DBR implementation requires relatively fewer resources compared to other interventions and other tier two interventions, right? Most notably, the time needed to actually implement it and the people involved, those human resources, right? DBR provides a consistent structure for increasing positive student and teacher interactions and attention because you're having those interactions at the end of every one of those rating periods, right? And this can also be extended again to that collaboration with other folks in the building and families. Now, no intervention is ever going to be perfect. We're always going to have challenges that we want to be on the lookout for. And so with DBR, we want to really make sure we're focusing on maintaining the positivity, maintaining that positive communication with students when you're providing the corrective feedback. So balancing the corrective feedback with those positive statements about student behavior and balancing that positivity with families, right? Keeping that similar balance in mind. We also want to keep function in mind. So Kathleen again mentioned this a little while ago. So it's really important with DBR to consider the needs of students that are motivated by escaping tasks or activities rather than being motivated to access teacher attention, right? So if we have an escape function, DBR might not be the best fit in those situations. So we want to make sure we attend to that. And last, before I turn it over to Mark to get you situated with your step-by-step process, I just want to go over a few key considerations to think about when getting started with DBR. So first, we're going to think about considerations when it comes to instrumentation. And we have two here. The first one is going to be about the behavior. So how do we want the student's behavior to change because of this intervention? So for example, do we want to see a goal behavior increase or do we want to see a decrease in a problem behavior or both? How about the number of behavior targets that you're going to include in your DBR intervention? How many are we going to target? Again, back to the flexibility I mentioned a moment ago, you can target one behavior or up to three, right? One, two, or three behaviors can be targeted on one DBR. The three examples that you see listed here, academic engagement, respectful behavior, and disruptive behavior, are three of the most common that you might come across when learning about DBRs. You could include all three of these, one of them, two of them, or again, your own operationally defined behaviors. Now, the other considerations that I want to take a moment to bring to your attention are procedural in nature. Okay, so these have to do with frequency of data collection, the rater, and the setting for the feedback. So first, in terms of frequency of data collection, you want to consider how often ratings are going to be completed. Is it going to be once per day, more than once per day, less than once per day, right? So what's the right rating period and frequency for the students? Then we want to think about the rater. Who's going to be the rater completing the DBR? Very often, it's the classroom teacher, right, as a part of this tier two intervention. but it can be anybody who's consistently present for that observation period. So there's a chance you might be able to utilize other adults, but you want to make sure it's somebody who's going to be there consistently for the reading period. And finally, you want to think about the feedback. So, where is the student going to receive feedback on their behavior? Is it going to always be at school? Is there going to be a home component to receiving that feedback? So, now we're going to enter another one of our talk times. So, here are some of our questions for your talk time in your group. So, what are your initial thoughts and reactions now that you've learned about DVR? What components do you think might be most feasible? And of course, what do you think might be challenging about implementing DBR? Always important to consider both sides of the coin.
Before I get started with the PowerPoint portion, I just want to give you some resources. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send you in the chat a list of 3 handouts that you can download in our module on direct behavior rating. I'm going to show you how to access that module in just a moment. And if you're able to get into the module tonight, you might want to download those 3 documents amongst some other resources that you'll find there, because when we're doing the planning time that's going to come up during this section, you can actually use those handouts when you download them. You can take notes in them and start doing some of the actual work to get ready to do this for a student in your class, potentially as late as tomorrow, because DBR truly is a very feasible tool to use. So before I go to the PowerPoint, let's look at our website for just a moment. So if you go to this website, I'm going to put this link in the chat for you. If you've been here before, then bear with me because you already know this. But if this is your first time, when you get here, you're going to find at the top a place to sign up to become a module user. You would click this link right here. It'll ask you to view an informational letter that just tells you about some of the information that we're collecting as people use these resources that I'll show you in just a moment, as part of some research that we're doing. And once you complete that process, you'll give the survey your email address. And once your email address goes into after about 5 or 10 minutes, you then can sign into any one of these modules that are on this page. And each one is an incredible collection of teaching tools, data collection tools, presentations on a certain topic that you can use related to supporting students across academic, behavioral, and social and emotional domains. So I really encourage you to sign up right here at the top, right? Because you can access everything on this page after you do that. If you're not already signed up, don't stress. That's totally okay. I'm going to show you what it would look like if you were signed up. And if you want to ride along with me, all the better. So we're talking about direct behavior rating tonight. That is a tier 2 intervention. So I head down to the tier 2 intervention section. I find direct behavior rating right here. I'm going to open it up in a new tab. And if you've already signed up, then you will be able to enter your email address into the prompt that'll show on your screen. And if you have not yet signed up, then you would do that sign up process I mentioned earlier. And then once you've completed that, then you also could come to this module. And once you're in, just like every single one of our modules, it shows you an ebook that has, like I said, a trove of resources. You can read it. You can also view an interactive resource that's like a video version of the module, video/audio book, which is really cool. But what I'm going to show you is the overview. Every single one of the modules has an overview section that basically is a table of contents of all the downloadable resources that you might use in support of the content targeted in this module. So I put in the chat list of sources. There's a handout for direct behavior rating implementation checklist. That is, let's see here, right here, handout direct behavior rating implementation checklist. I click the link and it's going to download that document to my computer. One of the first talk times that we're going to do here in about 10 minutes, you're going to open that document up and take some notes for how you might do this intervention for one of your students. So if you're already registered for the module, you might choose to download that right now. If you're not, you can try to register or you can just listen. By all means, don't stress about getting into the module right now. It's just fine. You can get a lot from this just by kind of walking through this process with me. Okay, so now we'll go to the actual presentation. So let's talk through the 9-step process. And boy, 9 steps sounds like a lot, but I promise you, most of these steps are pretty easy to do. And the ones that are a little bit more complicated, you'll have a lot of tools that you can use to help you with this when you get started. So we're going to have, I think, 2 or 3 work times where we're going to pause this presentation as we go through the steps so that you will have an opportunity to actually do some of the planning for those steps. And you'll go to the breakout rooms we were just in and work through one or multiple steps. The implementation checklist that I mentioned that we just kind of looked at how to download, that's going to be the most important handout. So if you can download one thing, that's the one that I would recommend doing. So let's talk about the first step. Okay, so step one of the DBR process is to select and define 1 to 3 behaviors that you want to target. Kate did such a great job introducing the DBR, and it's so flexible because you choose which behaviors you would like to focus on with the student. And for those students at the tier 2 level, that could be any number of behaviors that you'd like to increase or decrease. A lot of people will just choose to align the behaviors that they want to assess with their school-wide expectations. So if you happen to work in a school that's implementing PBIS, it might be respectful, be responsible, give effort. Those could be the 3 behaviors that you monitor. If you have a really specific concern about a student that you really need to work on, say disruptive behavior, that could certainly be one of the behaviors that you monitor. But we would encourage you to monitor at least one positive behavior that you'd like to increase. And I'll describe why that's the case in just a moment. And when we talk about positive behaviors, we'll kind of say positive or goal behaviors interchangeably. It can be helpful to monitor a behavior that you want to decrease, but we need to have a goal, right? What are we trying to achieve? So we'll kind of come back to that in a minute. Now, if you wouldn't mind, open up your chat, and I want you to share an example of one target behavior that you might like to decrease in your classroom. So just one behavior that you'd like to decrease. Let's see what you all have on your minds today. Calling out of seat, hands on students, being disrespectful, off task, arguing. Great. Chit chat, eloping. This is a really nice list of very recognizable behaviors, right? I will say, if elopement is your concern, I don't think direct behavior reading is probably the intervention that you would want to be focused on right now. Not to say that it's not an intervention for other students in your class, but if you have concern over a serious, aggressive, or dangerous behavior, then you would want to go towards more of a tier 3 level intervention, something that's more intensive. DBR is great for tier 2. So these are kids that have behavior challenges. They need support, but not at the highest level. Okay, so now we talked about some behaviors that might be a challenge. What are some behaviors that you would like to increase? What might be some goal behaviors that you'd like to monitor with DBR? Passively on task behavior, that's good. Okay. So sitting down longer, hand raising, on task, engagement. That's my favorite. Academic engagement. Students respectful, self-regulation. Self-regulation's good. It's a little bit hard to observe self-regulation necessarily, but I think it's a good goal, certainly. Focus, assignment completion, that's good. Yep, that's great. Okay, this is a really good list. And as you're thinking about behaviors that you want to increase, I would encourage you to think about what is a behavior that if they're doing that, it's going to help them be more productive in the classroom, and doing that behavior is going to make it possible for them to also be doing something that is getting in their way. If you have a kid that's roaming around the classroom all the time and your goal behavior is academic engagement, I would say they're almost incompatible with each other, right? So if you increase engagement, almost by definition, you're going to decrease the out of seat behavior. Not necessarily all the time, but for the most part, it's a helpful way to think about your 2 behaviors that you might want to increase or decrease. Okay, so now we need to make sure that we define those behaviors really specifically, because if you're going to use the DBR, you can't just say out of seat, leave it at that, because believe it or not, if you invite 2 people into your classroom and rate their DBR on out of seat behavior, you might end up very 2 different ratings, not because people weren't paying attention, but because the way that they defined those behaviors was just different. So we need to define the behaviors really specifically. You're in luck, though, if you're seeking resources on how to define behaviors, which is called operational definitions. We have this nice infographic that's available in the module that I just shared with you. You could download it from the overview page, and it's going to break any good behavior definition. It's going to have four parts. It's going to have a label. That's just the way that we refer to the behavior. So I'm a big fan of academic engagement. So that's the label of the behavior I want to increase. We're going to define it very briefly. Academic engagement is engaging in instructional tasks as requested. And you might add on there that it's either passive or active, right? Either one would count as engagement. So the definition is there. It's very simple. Then we're going to give some examples. So what does engagement look like? It might look like eyes on the teacher, raising hand quietly. You might include some definitions of passive engagement, like waiting their turn to participate in an activity, waiting patiently for the next activity to begin. And then we're also going to specify some non-examples. So what would you see that would not count as academic engagement? Off task with peers, doing, staring out the window long periods of time. And you want to use the examples and non-examples to tease out maybe where some people might not agree on what the behavior is or is not. Very important to write a good definition. And if you have a special education teacher in your life, or if you are a special education teacher in your life, either give that person a hug or pat them on the back or pat yourself on the back because God bless you. But also, special ed teachers are really good at this because they do it for their job. So if you're struggling to write a good definition, definitely reach out to a special ed teacher. Okay, so characteristics of a clear definition are objective, observable. You should be able to see it without having to assume what a person is thinking. It should be unambiguous and clear so that an observer could easily understand it. It articulates what a behavior is and is not, leaves little room for subjective judgment, and it describes an action rather than non-action. So you don't want to include things like not raising hand as a non-example. You would want to say sitting still when a response is requested. You want to put it in terms of what they do rather than what they did not do. So for example, you could use participation as a label for a behavior. The definition for participation is responding to teacher or peer-initiated interactions. That would be active participation. I wonder, does passive participation count? That's a question that I have. That's something to think about for improving this definition even. Raising your hand, responding to teacher-led questions, volunteering during tasks, etc. These are examples of participation. Non-examples would be keeping your hand down, making no verbal utterances during an academic task. I think this is a great definition for a student that is capable of verbally responding to interactions in the classroom. But for a student that's maybe nonverbal, maybe they have autism or selective mutism, you would need to tailor this definition to what they can do. Like, what would participation look like for this student? It's a good example of how these definitions are tailored to individual needs and abilities of the student. Okay, step 2, determine the specified observation period or activities. It's really important for your own well-being that you not get carried away and try to do DBR more than you manage. So if you're loving this and you're like, I'm going to do this all day, well, that's I love your ambition, but you might choose 2 or 3 times a day, or even just one time of day when you have the most concern and say, I would to progress monitor this student during time A and maybe also time B, but choose a period of time or 2 periods of time and stick to those periods. It's really important that if you're going to compare your ratings over time, that you're observing the same time of day and activity, because if you're getting different time of day and activity, then you don't know if behavior change is occurring because you're just capturing variance between different things that you see during the school day. Okay, choose a time and stick to it. If you do decide to do multiple times a day, you could certainly choose 2 blocks that maybe give that student or something along those lines. But I would encourage you to be nice to yourself and start small so that you can be consistent and successful with this as you get started. I would also encourage you, I would not try to do this with more than maybe 3 students in your class, maybe 4, but honestly, I'd probably do 1 or 2 to start, because if you're trying to fill out 3 DBR forms during the same time of day, it can be done. I've seen teachers do it. It can be done. But I would start small, build up your competence and skill, and then scale it up to the way that feels appropriate. But you probably don't want to do this intervention for a whole bunch of kids in your class at the same time, because it's just really not feasible to do that. So I would say at a max, maybe 3 to 4, but start small. Okay, so we're going to pause here for a moment. I want you to think about steps 1 and 2, which are defining the behaviors and defining the time during the day when you might do this. And you're going to think about it for a specific student or a hypothetical student. You can write it down on the implementation checklist if you downloaded that document. If you don't have that document, don't worry. Take note wherever you are going to find them when you're ready to start. Okay, let's go to our rooms. We'll see you back here in 7 minutes. All right, welcome back. Thanks for holding on while you're waiting for me to get back. All right, I'm going to
Mark,
go.
could I jump in?
Sure. Yeah.
One thing that we're talking about in our group, in addition to identifying behaviors that you want to increase or decrease, is the importance of identifying behaviors that are within the control or the skill set of the child. You don't want them to directly have ratings on something like self-monitoring that they haven't learned what to do yet.
Definitely. We put this in terms of, I would say, performance challenges, things somebody can do, but they're not doing it often enough. That's the sweet spot for this. And really, it's important to remember this is tier 2, right? So if you're really preoccupied with kids with major challenging behavior, fair enough. Come back and see us next time, because we're talking about tier 3 functional assessment based intervention next time. It's going to be a show. It's going to be great. I really hope that you'll come back and check that one out. All right, so step 3 is going to be about preparing the DBR form. And if you're in the module, this form can be downloaded. This is the standard form. That's one of the 3 documents that I listed at the start of the presentation tonight. You can download it and edit it to your heart's content to make it match the behaviors that you selected. What you're going to want to do is fill in the form up to 3 behaviors per student. You're going to put your definition with your examples and non-examples, because you're going to want to be able to refer to those behaviors and the definitions when you're doing your ratings. I would also say, depending on whether you're rating a behavior that you want to increase or decrease, put a little happy face on there for yourself in the direction that you would like to rate the student. So if you're rating engagement, a rating of 10 all the time, that's a good thing. But if you're rating disruption, put a happy face at 0, because you'd like to rate a 0 for disruption, not at all disruptive. That can be helpful when you're trying to bounce back and forth between behaviors you want to increase and ones you want to decrease. And then also, you're going to want to note the observation periods on these forms as well, because again, it's really important to keep that time consistent. And what you can do, what we've done on some studies that we're running right now, is if you make this form, make it a template, because you're not going to change these behaviors over time. These are the behaviors you're going to monitor consistently so that you can have something to see if behavior change is occurring. You can just pre-populate the form by typing in your responses and your definitions, and you can print 50 copies or 25 copies, however many that you think you might need, and then you're all set up and ready to go. And by doing it that way, you ensure that you're keeping your procedures the same, because that consistency is really important for your measurement to remain valid over time. Okay, let's take a little tour of that form. So again, you can download this and edit it to your heart's content. You're going to list the student, the time, your name on there, or whoever's going to be doing the rating. You've got the definitions there for you. This one is going to have academically engaged, respectful, and disruptive. Those are like the classic OG direct behavior rating behaviors, which have a lot of research to say that they are valid and reliable behaviors that you can assess. But again, you can customize them based on your needs. At the bottom, there's a place for you to write some comments. Today, I forgot to blank. Please talk with me tonight and practice with me. That's for the student's family. Oh, and then on the other side, today I remembered to blank. Please talk with me tonight and praise me. Now, I'm going over time, but I think this is really, really important. Okay, so hear me on this. If you're going to send these things home, if you're going to use the direct behavior rating as a tool to communicate with parents and families, you have to every single day list out something here that you can heartfeltedly and honestly tell that parent's family that that child did well during this period. There's always something to note, even if it's like after less than ideal circumstances, they got mad, but they were willing to come back and have a conversation with me, whatever it might be, because we have to highlight the positive, and we also have to highlight constructively maybe things that need to be worked on. So on the right side, we're always going to tell something positive that happened during that observation period. On the left side, we're always going to say something constructive that the parent can talk to them about. The goal is not to be punitive. Goal is for this to be a coachable, constructive feedback and relationship building. And to some extent, accountability. Accountability is good. Punitive is not helpful to anybody, right? So if we're not careful and we're sending a long list of things that the kid did wrong that day, when the kid sees this coming off the clipboard and going into the pack, they're going to be like, no, 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 no. They're not going to give it to their parents. They're going to hide it. It's going to be offensive for them. It's going to have low social validity. We'll talk about that later. That's not helpful to anybody. So we have to keep this conductive, and we have to find a way to make this feedback serve its purpose, which is certainly accountability, also reinforcement, coaching, positivity, communication. Okay, that's an important detail for how we're going to use those notes. Okay, step 4. So step 3 was make the form work for you, customize your form. Step 4 is going to be decide who is going to actually fill the form out and what kind of reward system you might use in conjunction with the form. Most of the time, the DBR will be completed by the teacher. The reason for that is because the beauty of DBR is that it is very feasible to use, very straightforward, does not take very much time. So I would encourage you as the teacher or the teacher of the classroom to do it. Sometimes people will have maybe a secondary rater if you have a school counselor in the classroom occasionally or a paraprofessional in the classroom occasionally. It can be useful to have 2 people doing the ratings, and you compare ratings that you're reliable. And at some point, you might also have a student do their own rating as kind of a self-monitoring intervention. That's a bit of a separate area. So if you're going to go that way, you kind of think about what skills the student might need to successfully self-monitor. But for starter, it's probably going to be the teacher. Now, when you think about rewards, it's a good idea to integrate some reward system into the direct behavior, like the use of a ticket. The ticket is likely a part of your school-wide PBIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports plan. Whatever system you have to reinforce students, you'd like to stick with that system rather than create some whole new system. So think about how you can work that in here. Now, at the risk of running into a tangent that I don't want to go all the way into the weeds, I will say, be careful of making the reinforcement, the ticket, contingent or reliant on getting a certain rating on the DBR form. Because if you tell the kid you're going to get a ticket if you get a score of an 8 or higher on academic engagement, and then you give them a 7, what's going to happen? They're going to argue. They're going to be upset. It's going to feel a little bit arbitrary and punitive. They're not giving them the ticket. I would encourage you instead to think during the time doing VR, how can I strategically use the reinforcement system during that time and provide feedback? And then at the end of this time, you're going to say, hey, I really noticed that you were working really hard to be engaged during this time. I gave you a ticket then, and I really want you to know I appreciate it. I'm going to give you another ticket right now because you were very engaged during that time. So don't make it contingent on a specific rating. Do make it contingent on specific behaviors that you want to increase. And even if it happen once during 30 minutes, reinforce, right? If your kid is struggling and they're not engaged, the one time you can catch them being engaged, you're going to give that reinforcement to them because that's how the tool works. We increase the behavior when it occurs by reinforcing it. So just something to keep in mind. It'll help you avoid hot water later when you have that argument kid or that competitive kid who's melting down because they have 7 instead of an 8. And it's like, we're missing the point. So don't go there. Also, ensure the reward options match the student's interest, functions of the behavior. Familiar with functions of behavior, kids often are motivated by attention or escape. Sometimes also sensory inputs as well. Kids are really into attention. Behavior-specific praise, an adult might be the best thing that you can do for that student. So use praise, you can also use the ticket, but the praise is going to be really great. If you have kids that are all about getting out of tasks, think about how the student can use that ticket to possibly escape from a non-preferred task. If it's homework or some task in the classroom, if they could exchange 10 tickets to avoid an assignment, that gives them something to work for that's going to give them what they're interested in. So something to kind of manage your planning reinforcement aspect. Snacks, yes, of course. Why not snacks? As we move forward to step 5, you want to make sure that the rater knows how to use the DBR form. If you are going to be the rater, congratulations, you've been here tonight. You're probably going to be very well set up to do the rating. If you're going to have somebody else do the rating, they would need some training and support. The good news is that the form is based very self-explanatory, because the definition on there, all the information you need is on the form, but also this module that we've talked about a few times tonight, you can share these modules with your colleagues. So you can use this as a way to train other people. I'll show you another resource you can use for training as well. Some additional guidance, you're going to make sure that the ratings are completed about daily, during that set time. You're going to keep that time consistent every single day, same time, same subject. You don't want to vary it a whole lot because then your ratings become less meaningful because you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing apples to jackfruit, which I just had my first jackfruit the other day. Have you guys ever had jackfruit? It's incredible. Highly recommend. Okay, tangent. Ratings should be completed immediately at the end of the observation period. I know you're very busy. You have a lot going on. You don't like jackfruit? I get it. It's weird, but it's very good. So I know that you're busy, your classroom schedules make it hard to do this immediately after, but the longer you, you don't have to apologize. It's so good though. So the longer you wait to do the rating after the end of the observation period, the more difficult it is for you to remember specifics of what happened during the observation. So you want to try to make sure that you're doing those ratings consistently right after the observed period. And then lastly, you only want to rate the behavior that took place during the observation period. You can kind of get yourself spun up into a confusing situation because you know your student really well if you start sort of projecting things onto them, like they were upset earlier today, so I probably weren't very engaged during math time because they were so upset during recess this morning. We're just going to say what was observed, what did I see, and we're not going to, take the past, future, or how we think that they're doing into consideration. We're really focused on what was observable. Okay. So those are just a few things to think about. Also consider your logistics. Where are you going to store the DBRs? How are you going to remind yourself to fill this out every day? I'm a big believer in habits. So if you do it every day, soon enough, you need any reminders as you're trying to get started. If you've got a phone reminder that you can set to go off at the start of the subject and time each day when you're going to do the DBR, I think that's a really helpful way to make sure that you're consistent so you build those habits. Okay. Training opportunities. Again, I think tonight hopefully has been a really positive experience for you to get your feet wet in understanding what does DBR look like? How do I do it? However, there's a really, really wonderful tool that was created by our friends at University of Connecticut called the DBR training site. The URL is in the PowerPoint. What I love about this resource is it has videos. You can watch videos of real classrooms, fill out real DBRs on your computer, and it's going to give you feedback about whether your rating matches the rating that was provided by the research team. So if you're looking for support and practice to get ready to do DBR, that's a really cool thing. Also, it sends you a certificate, which I know it's like, it's just a piece of paper, but it kind of makes you feel like you accomplished something when you pass this DBR course. So strongly recommend, and you can also share it with friends, share it with your family, what you want to do to use. I think that's a really good resource. Okay, so moving on to step 6. This is the last step before we go to our next breakout room. Make sure all stakeholders understand the DBR procedure. This means the adult implementing the direct behavior rating is going to train the student. You're going to explain to the student what to expect, why you're doing it, how it might help them, incorporate practice and feedback. It is vital to make sure kids don't feel like this is surveillance and monitoring of them to get them in trouble. Because if that's how they feel about it, that's the attitude that they will take away from this. It's not going to feel instructive for them. It's going to feel punitive. So instead, I would really encourage you to sit down with the kids, say, hey, we want to help you be the best student you can be. We want to help you with some of these things that I think have been getting in your way. So to do that, I want to help to make sure you have a little extra support from me during this time of day. And to know if it's helping or not, we're going to take these ratings. But I want you to know, I'm not going to use the ratings to get you in trouble. We're going to share it with your family, but only so that they know what's going on. And we're going to give things that you did well, we'll praise you, and we're going to give you a little bit of coaching and support. So it's got to be a constructive conversation, but the students should be informed about what's going on. And later we have a little rating scale that I'll show you that you can even have them fill out to say, like, do they think this is a good idea? And then if the DBR is tied to a reward system, then you have to ensure that everyone understands how that's going to be used, if there's a specific criteria, what the rewards look like. Not on this slide, but I think equally important, if not more so, also communicate with the parents and make sure that they know why you're doing it, that the form is going to come home and how you would like them to talk about this child. So this pretty much would require, if you're going to send these home, having a phone call with the parent, say, hey, we've noticed some challenges, but we think we have this idea that could help them out. We'd like to share some notes back with you. Honestly, I think some parents, they just cannot take any more negative commentary about their students, right? If they're having a lot of phone calls from the school and things like that, it might feel overwhelming to them. So anticipate parents and families are at. And if you feel like this is going to be a pile-on scenario, maybe you start saying, okay, we're going to start this at school. I'll use it to coach them. We're going to try to build some success. And then once I have some good notes to send home to you, I'm going to send those home. And we're going to build it up to where we feel like we can be fully kind of back and forth. But whatever you can do to really build a positive relationship from this, that's the point. Not a laundry list of sort of things that have not gone well. Now, step 7 is going to be to actually start doing the ratings. So you're going to be implementing direct behavior rating, time of day that you decided. Maybe you're doing it daily, maybe you're doing it 4 times a week. But you're going to be thinking about this in terms of a set of steps that you're going to use every day so that your implementation, your use of direct behavior rating looks kind of the same every day. It's not going to be willy-nilly. We're going to have certain things that we do each day. We call this treatment integrity, basically saying, did I use this on a consistent basis? And we have a little check that you can print out. You could even print back. So this is on the back side of the direct behavior rating form. You could do it that way if you wanted to. And so basically it's going to help you to think through, like, what are the steps I need to do? I need to let the student know that the time period is starting before the observation starts. I'm going to observe them throughout the period. I'm going to rate their behavior at the end of the period. I'm going to check in with the student and give them some feedback, some praise. I'm going to share the DBR if I've decided that thing I want to do. So you're going to fill that out each day so that you know which parts of the steps you're completing. And honestly, if you forget to do certain parts of the steps, if you're forgetting to check in with the student at the end of each day, that's okay. You're not going to beat up about it, but fill this little checklist out. It's kind of like a self-monitoring checklist for yourself to make sure that you're not skipping some of the really critical steps, because this probably isn't going to work if we're not checking in with kids and giving them feedback, right? That's kind of one of the active ingredients. So pretty helpful little data collection tool. In addition, there's going to be, oh, I think I, no, okay. There's going to be some data review that's going to happen. So you're going to want to look at what the ratings look over time and how people are feeling about the intervention. So to help with that, as part of the module, this is the third bullet that I put into the chat at the very beginning. We have an entire data collection tool that's built out as a Google Doc and a downloadable Excel spreadsheet. And basically you can graph your DBR data on a daily basis. So in the module, we've got the spreadsheet tiered intervention data manager. I clicked the Google link here, which opened in a new tab. You could also click the Excel link to download an Excel version of this. The Google link that I clicked is going to show you something that looks like this. It's a whole set of spreadsheets that you can use for data collection. And I'm going to find the direct behavior rating tab, which is here. And in this tab, basically what you see are columns for the three that I'm measuring: engaged, respectful, and disruptive. I might say these are like my baseline data before I've tried this intervention. And you can see that it graphs yellow is disruptive, red is respectful, blue is engaged. And then as I'm starting to use more feedback, get reinforcement and rewards, sharing information with parents and families, hopefully we're going to see an increase in engagement, for example. So the first day of intervention, the student got a rating of 6. The next day of intervention, the student got a 7 and then an 8. And you can see my blue line creeping upward, right? We can kind of hold it at that level of 8. And 8 is amazing. If a student is engaged 80% of the time, huge. Now, perhaps respectful behavior also improved, which is great. Behavior is kind of holding steady at a level of 7. And then lastly, hopefully that disruptive behaviors start heading down. So you can see my yellow line heading down. So if you're going to take these data, you want to graph them, right? Because that's the beauty of having numerical data. And we really urge you to check out this tool to learn how to graph your data. So if you're looking for support, there's a video that teaches you how to use it here, and you can always come back to these sessions and we're happy to answer questions as well. Okay, the last step here before we go to our final work time is that we're going to get input from students and families. So ideally, before you even start, you're going to sit down and have that conversation with students to say, hey, we think this intervention might give you some support at school. We want to help by giving you more opportunities to get feedback and rewards. They're going to share this form called a social validity form, which you're looking at here. It's a little questionnaire that basically will give you some clues about how the student's feeling about this item. And if the student is feeling hesitant or reserved or worried that it's not going to go well for them, it gives them an opportunity to share that with you. And by doing that, you have an opportunity to then reduce their concerns by explaining what you're trying to accomplish, relationship building, being transparent, and finding a way to make this for them. So maybe if they share some reservations, it's not that we're not going to do it, but we're going to find a way to make it work for them. You might also share this with parents and families to see how they're, so not the students' ratings, but you can share a rating scale or questionnaire with the parents and families to get an idea for how they're feeling about it. With the same idea, you want to know, is something I should be keeping in mind as I'm doing this that I can change or alter to make this work for you? Because again, the idea is bridge building using this as a family communication tool. So you want to have these conversations before you start so that there's total transparency and you've got a plan for what that communication is going to look like. Okay, so we're going to wrap up about 12 minutes in planning where you're going to look at those final steps and start doing some thoughts about what this is going to look like if you were to do this for your students at your school. So we'll see you back here in about 12 minutes to wrap up. And
I really want to thank you guys. What a fun session. And I just want to give a little bit of a short out apology/laugh to the group that I was in last. That was the full court press to get people to talk, and I appreciate you guys unmuting and contributing. So seriously, thank you very much. This was fun to hear from such wonderful experts, and I really want to give a sincere thanks to the others that are here tonight that participated in the development of this module. As they mentioned, this was all developed in partnership with Sandy Shafoulias and Amy Breach and Wendy Oakes and David Royer, who is here, and Eric Hammond, who is here as part of Project Enhance. And so it's been wonderful to get a chance to scale up resources for using direct behavior ratings. We hope that you have found something that feels potentially useful in your classroom. I did want to give a plug. We have the honor of working with 32 teachers this year that are doing DBR as part of this intervention package, and the feedback from them has been overwhelmingly positive. And so far, of all the teachers that we've talked to, every single teacher except one said that they would feel good to go with using that moving forward. This one teacher's had a particularly complicated year. And the teachers that we've been working with are doing this with anywhere between 1 and 3 kids in their classroom. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And you are now going to be part of the thousands of teachers across the country that have had the opportunity to learn about DBRs. If you have the opportunity, we would love to share another evening with you. We have one more session, and it is all about functional assessment-based interventions, which is near and dear to our hearts because it is the big guns that get brought out. It's how we support students that are experiencing some of the most intensive intervention needs. And the nice thing is it's solutions-based, it is positive, it's productive, and it's going so well in line with some of the themes in the chat about making sure that we're being positive and constructive and giving kids new skills that they need. So if you're up for it, we'd love to see you come back. That is our final session for this year. And we will also at that session be releasing the flyer so that you can sign up for things for next year if you'd like. If you're willing to, we give a great appreciation to you for taking the time to tell us how we did tonight. We share these evaluations with our funder, the Institute of Education Sciences. I've had a lot of messages with people asking, will you still do this next year, given everything that's happening? And the answer is 100%. We will be here. So I hope you will join us as well. And I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I know we've got some people that have logged in even internationally to be here tonight. And it is a gift to share the evening with you. So thank you for being such positive, productive scholars and educators. And thanks to the wonderful Ci3T team. I know we are across a huge time range tonight. So thank you. And I wish you all well. And I hope to see you soon. Have a great evening.